So, Alex Glew, thank you very much for being here today. We're pleased that you're running, and I think the best place to start with this conversation is in your past political activities. You have run twice for the Los Altos City Council, I understand, and you currently serve on the Los Altos Design Commission.
Yes, I serve on the Design Commission.
Right, and then you ran against Mark Berman in the state assembly race.
Yes.
Right. Okay. And so I'm wondering, in that particular race, the assembly race, you obviously were defeated handily by Berman in a largely Democratic district. So I'm wondering what your thinking is as to this particular race and why you think you'll be a competitive candidate.
Well, currently, there was a poll taken, and I am leading the polls at 25%. So in terms of being competitive, I am competitive right now. In terms of what is going to happen in the future, I can't predict that. What we have is a top two system in California, where we will distill down the 7 candidates to 2. The purpose of the top two system was to produce more moderation in politics. When there was one party choosing its candidates, the thinking was that people would play to the left or the right to appease their party, and that if we had open jungle system, people would move more to the middle to try to garner more votes. That doesn't really appear to be happening in this district. What I see is the Democratic candidates sort of trying to, I don't want to say out-left each other, but moving left. They're not moving toward the middle. I'm actually the candidate that's probably closer toward the middle. You know, if you look at John F. Kennedy from the 60s and his ideals, they probably align more with the Republican Party at this point. So if people will open their minds and get to know the candidates, I think that what I stand for is a competitive position. Whether or not I have the machinery behind me to make it happen and the demographics on my side, well, that's another question.
Do you feel that the larger Senate district gives you a better competitive situation than the smaller assembly district running against an incumbent city council member? Is that part of it? Or?
Well, I think that being a larger district, there's a chance for, how should I put this? There's a chance for somebody like me who was born in the Bay Area, grew up in San Mateo County. I've spent my whole life, except for when I was at Berkeley, in San Mateo or Santa Clara County. So given my background in these number of the communities here, I think it's an advantage, having it being a little larger.
Okay. You have identified the unfunded pension liability as a major part of why you're running, at least from what I've observed so far. And I wonder if you could explain to us what your solution is to that problem, or at least what the steps are towards solving it.
Yes. Well, the solution is to move to a defined contribution plan, something similar to a 401k. The federal government fixed this problem years ago. Some other states have done this. We need to migrate the system so that it isn't putting all the risk on the taxpayer. Currently, if the pension plan doesn't make its 8% return, which it never will. It's basically a doctored system. It can never make its 8% return. The employees don't bear the burden. The taxpayer, the cities, the municipalities, the counties, anybody with a public employee in that system bears the risk. That's not good, and it's not fair, and it's not working out. At $1 trillion, according to the Stanford study, if everybody could pay, that's on the order of $250,000 a person in the state of California. Well, half the people don't pay taxes, and the quarter are living in poverty. They're not paying. So that translates to about $500,000 burden on everybody in California to pay for the pension plan. Clearly, there's something in the calculus that's wrong. You don't need to be brilliant to understand that it doesn't add up. Most people, if they were told they had $500,000 to pay into a system for somebody else's retirement, but they had nothing in their retirement, would be kind of upset. People don't really seem to grasp the issue and understand the gravity of it. I wouldn't say that's my main issue, but I think it's something that really plays out on a lot of other areas. One of the reasons we don't have the money for transportation, mass transit, and roads, and all these other things is because the pension debacle is basically draining money out of every corner of the state. We don't have money for education too. I mean, there's a difference between a pension plan and actual education. With students taking courses in trailers in this great state of California, there's something wrong.
Do you think there's a political path to moving to a defined contribution system rather than what we have now with the pension system?
I'm not sure the
Democratic domination of the legislature and the role of labor unions in California.
I'm not sure what the political path is at this point. It needs to be a wake-up call for the people of California to stop letting the unions essentially buy Democrat politicians and then vote in their benefits and approve this situation and allow it to go on. There just needs to be an uproar. At some point, if California were faced with bankruptcy, which it very well could, if people stop approving the tax increases and other sorts of measures necessary to sustain this system, there may be an uprising. In the past, a governor was thrown out over automobile tax, Gray Davis. When the people get upset, sometimes they take matters more seriously, and that may end up being the path.
All right, well, let's dive into housing. I wanted to ask you about the controversial legislation, SB 50, because there's certainly people on both sides feeling very strongly that we need housing at any cost, but we don't want the state controlling what local governments decide. What are your ideas around SB 50?
Well, I always like to try to understand the fundamental problem. Why is this a problem? How did it come about? I think it's important to start with the basics. Something I learned studying at Stanford was fundamentals. Just approach the basic of the problem. If we look in the Silicon Valley and the Bay Area, it's been a great job generator. It creates economic opportunity in that front. But along with jobs comes the needs of people. So we've essentially created too many jobs given what we have. There are estimates that there will be a 30% increase in people in the Silicon Valley in the next 10 years, but there's no plan for that. So is your question along the lines of the solution or how this...
Well, I thought we'd start with SB 50 since that's
right.
most familiar to people.
So, all right,
and the elements therein, and we can talk about other ideas.
So I oppose SB 50. I oppose it in its last form that came out in 2018, and I will oppose it in any future form. If I make it to the Senate, then I'm sure it will have a different name at that time if it gets regurgitated again. But many communities oppose it. I understand largely Palo Alto opposes it. Even poor communities in LA oppose it. It basically creates central planning at the state level. Japan did this. They basically removed all zoning control locally, and it's done at a very high level. I don't think it's the solution to the problem. Creating higher density doesn't address traffic. It doesn't address the whole host of problems that go with too many people in one area without enough geography or infrastructure in place.
Do you think that cities have failed in their responsibility to create housing such that the state should be stepping in at this point? Is there a role for the state?
I think that, to put it more squarely, it's a large problem. There have been failures on many levels. I would start by saying the Democratic Party has failed in the last 40 years to plan at a regional level. If you look at LA and San Francisco, those are two very large areas. San Francisco is the fourth largest metropolitan area, LA the second. So when you have massive regional problems like this, the state needs to be part of the solution. There's a book called Managing Power, and it talks about how after the last earthquake, LA repaired their freeways in a year, and San Francisco took 10 years. So some of that problem is San Francisco, or is the Bay Area. We have 20, I think at last count, 24 transit authorities. They don't cooperate. They don't work together. That's a problem. There needs to be a willingness for the counties, the cities, and the state to work together productively toward a solution. The cities have failed, the counties have failed, and the state has failed.
So you mentioned in your initial answer that one of the problems is that we've created too many jobs here for the housing and infrastructure that we have. What controls or limitations would you support imposing on the creation of new jobs or new commercial office space? And would you tie that at all to the creation of new housing?
I'll give you I'm an engineer by training, so I understand how to build things and planning and things like that. Sitting on the design commission, so I'm used to dealing with the cities at some level. And let me paint a different scenario as an example. Suppose some person said, I'm going to put in a tract of 1,000 houses here in the middle of this empty field. Great, okay. But what has to go along with that, someone's got to run power, someone's got to run sewage, fresh water, and the roads have to come in. If it were a bigger establishment, you might need another school. So any development requires commitment from the city or the county, sometimes the state if it's big enough, if it's a highway. So any expansion, any building of any magnitude requires a plan to get from greenfield to a functional urban space. When you look at something like the 1 million square feet of office space that just went up next to 101 in Santa Clara, and you multiply that by a couple, what is the plan to accommodate that? 1 million square feet is about 5,000 office workers. So along with 5,000 people comes more needs. So I think there does need to be a plan. For example, if the plan is to grow the job base by 75,000 jobs in a county, the county needs to have a plan for expressways, water. You can't increase the population by 30% when there's no water and to think that the water's not going to be a problem. All of these things, hospitals, for example, if you have 30% more people, you probably need 30% more emergency rooms, 30% more schools. There's just you need 30% more bowling alleys. You need 30% more everything, basically. So yes, there has to be a plan. It needs to be coordinated in terms of managed growth.
My question wasn't should there be a plan. My question is what requirements should be imposed tied to a company or a developer wanting to build new non-residential development. In other words, how does one get at this problem? If one isn't going to support state mandates such as SB 50, and it's not going to curb the additional development of office space, which attracts more people, I don't understand what your solution is.
Well, part of the solution needs to be to allow areas that might be more remote than, say, Santa Clara to accept some of the job growth. Some areas have land and they have the ability to grow their counties. Moving a little farther out, mass transit could put people well within the Bay Area easily. So I would suggest that we not have uncontrolled development of industrial or residential without the necessary infrastructure in place to go along with it concurrently. If we have a goal of 75,000 jobs in the county, then the county needs to step up, and either they can put in the roads, the schools, the water that they need, or they need to decline the zoning and the development. Development and zoning are not independent of the need for infrastructure around them. So when a county cannot put up the infrastructure necessary to support a zoning, whether, like I started with, a housing development, they need to be able to support it with roads and water and sewage and schools, or an industrial development, they need to be able to support it with roads, power. Power is a big deal for some industries. We can't run a lot of industries in this part of the world just because we don't have enough power. So, aluminum processing, for example, it's done where there's a lot of cheap hydro, otherwise you can't do it. There just needs to be some sort of check that if your next 5 years, if you're going to allocate this many new housing units and this many new commercial, I'll call them units for now, there needs to be a plan to support it with the necessary infrastructure so that everybody's quality of life doesn't degrade, there aren't vast environmental impacts, and there aren't safety and health issues associated with it. And if your county cannot support an infrastructure plan along with your development plan, then another county should be in the running for it.
I'd like to move on to the topic of homelessness.
Yes.
So Gavin Newsom and other state leaders have proposed numerous ways to address the homelessness crisis, from mandating that cities shelter their unhoused residents to using Medi-Cal funding for housing to pay for people's rents, housing funds, $750 million into a new housing fund. What's one approach that you strongly agree with and one that you fundamentally disagree with?
Well, it's difficult to paint the homelessness problem with one brush. The homelessness problem varies in different places. I've seen it up close and personal. The last report I read stated that 12% of the people on the streets in San Francisco were ex-cons. They can't get jobs. That's actually more than the hardcore drug users on the street in San Francisco. So that's different than if you go to Placerville or more remote parts of the country or state where you see people actually kind of living in the woods. If you go out to rural California, there's a lot of homeless people there too. But those are different than the people in San Francisco who are different than the homeless necessarily in Mountain View. In my office, I look out and I see 2 or 3 RVs. Some of the people are, every day they go to work. They have jobs. They're neat and clean. Other people, they're scary. They scream at you. They're crazy. They're probably on drugs. They're probably mentally ill. These are very different problems that can't be painted with the same brush. For the people, first of all, it starts like this. Don't let people become homeless. There needs to be a tiger team supported by nonprofit organizations in the state. So when a family can't make their rent, there needs to be something in place, or their mortgage, that there's a temporary loan so that a family with kids, elderly, don't just end up on the street. People lose their jobs, there's health issues, an illness in the family, they lose their car stops working, their daycare. So the first line of attack is to support people short-term with the necessary social measures to keep them from becoming homeless. It's easier to stop the spread of disease than to cure the disease once it's spread. It's just sort of a truism. Then for the people that are on the street that don't have income because they've lost their job, you go in with job training programs. Teach a man to fish and he eats for the rest of his life. For those that are mentally ill, well, they need treatment. They shouldn't be on the street. They should be treated the way anybody with an illness should be treated.
Are you in favor of a conservatorship type of program where people who are mentally ill on the street and don't want to engage in programs, are you in favor of some sort of mechanism to usher them into care?
Well, there's the carrot and the stick. To some extent, most of these people are breaking the law by living on the street, and along with numbers of people who have no source of income but yet manage to live comes crime. It's not true that all homeless are harmless, especially the ill. So I think that they would generally be given the choice of, you can do 90 days in county jail for having broken all the laws you've broken, or you can go into treatment. And treatment looks a lot better than the alternative. You can't deny people their freedom. I don't believe in the type of government where we just take people. But with someone who is a risk to themselves or a risk to others, certainly, that's the same standard you would apply to any person who was mentally ill. Yeah.
Governor Newsom's Homelessness Commission is heading in the direction of a recommendation that would require local governments, local cities, to provide shelter and safe parking areas for the homeless. Is that something that you would support?
By safe parking, you're referring to RVs or just general parking?
Well, overnight parking facilities for homeless people, whether they live in their car or an RV. But vehicle, the homeless that are living in vehicles.
I go to a lot of dog shows. We show golden retrievers. I'm very familiar with RVs. I would take it a step further in some areas and step back in others. In terms of parking, yes, there should be safe parking. There should also be RV hookups for these people. If you can provide power, water, and sewage, it's a very different life. The RVs that park near my office, they look for shade in the summer because it's hotter than heck. Sometimes I've had people dump sewage on the street near my business, and hazmat has to come out. They don't have water. I don't know where they get water. They have broken into our water on premises and used it. And,
so my question though is the state's role in mandating local communities to provide these services?
I think it's more of a county issue than a city issue. But I see the counties as having a role in providing safe areas for the vast numbers of people that are living out of cars and RVs at this point? Yes. They can coordinate with the cities.
The counties don't have any real leverage over the cities. The state obviously does if they pass a law or constitutional amendment that requires this of cities. But do you think it's really a regional?
I see it as a regional problem, yes, because the people move around depending on a lot of factors. For example,
That's okay.
we got some amount of time.
Yeah.
So I think that, but there's a lot of county and cities together need to provide this sort of thing. Yes.
I wanted to go back to one question I had, which was, do you believe that there's any approach that's being proposed or that currently exists that's a waste of taxpayer money for when it comes to trying to house the homeless?
Homelessness shouldn't be looked at as a permanent condition. The goal of any homeless program needs to be to get people off the streets, to get them functional again as people, as working individuals if possible. So I think to the extent that some of the programs are creating a permanent sort of a welfare state or system, I oppose it completely. The monies need to be set aside and geared toward keeping people safer. The health issues and concerns for homeless people are very serious. They need to be oriented toward trainings, medical treatment, drug treatment, and like I said earlier, keeping them off the street in the first place. Yeah.
What is your position on what has been adopted by the legislature's AB 5, which is designed to reduce as much as possible the use of independent contractors, response to the gig economy?
Yeah.
Are you supportive of that effort?
I've spent most of my life in the Silicon Valley working, my professional career. I'm used to somewhere between 10 and 20% of my colleagues being in the gig economy. I oppose it. I think we need to give people freedom to work how they want to work. We obviously don't want employers abusing the situation. That needs to be safeguarded. But if you look at an Uber driver, I think it's a great thing. I took an Uber yesterday in Dallas when I was there. It provides people with this was an Eritrean immigrant. It provides all kinds of opportunity for people who otherwise aren't necessarily going to go into a more traditional working environment. Students, people that want to just work evenings. To put those sort of regulations on business that don't allow the individual the opportunity to maximize their time and financial reimbursement is I think, unfair to the people.
I want to turn our attention to criminal justice. So Palo Altans, like many people, have day-to-day concerns about auto break-ins, auto thefts. And since the passage of Prop 47, that's increased, while at the same time achieving savings in the prison system. So there's a initiative on the ballot for November that would roll back some of the reforms that Prop 47 brought. And I'm wondering what you think of that, the criminal sentencing initiative.
I hope I'm not taking too long to answer your questions, but I would like to start with the fundamentals. A lot of politics and thought is a pendulum. We had 3 strikes, which went a little too far. The third strike being stealing a candy bar and you spend your life in jail. That was absurd. Now we've gone to the other extreme where you can, bring a calculator, stay under the fishing limit, as I call it, and only do this much theft and you're okay, nothing will happen. That's too far the other direction. Yes, we need to roll back some of the, I would call dismantling of the criminal justice system and restore some safety and law and order where we're lacking right now. Mm-hmm. There is a balance. We don't always get it right. Legislators don't always understand the implications of what they've done. And just as as 3 strikes went too far, that went, what we have right now went too far.
And specifically when you say restore balance, what do you favor?
People who commit crimes, the criminal gangs that are serial break into 10 cars a day, they need to suffer the consequences. They need to be highly discouraged from this sort of behavior. Saving money by not having people in jail isn't exactly the right answer. You shouldn't have people in jail who shouldn't be in jail. People shouldn't be in jail for life for stealing a candy bar. That's not it's a waste of money and it's cruel and it's immoral. But somebody who makes a living out of a gang theft ring should be in jail. So I'm not worried so much about the saving money. I'm worried about the law and order and safety and the moral position we've taken that it's okay to steal.
What is your position on the state's role with regards to PG&E's future, other than tightening up the PUC's oversight of it? Are you in favor of the state considering an increased role in either the ownership of PG&E or in some other respect?
I have a couple thoughts on that. To some extent, the PUC is responsible for the problem. They give a lot of direction to PG&E, and a lot of it's the wrong direction. So I think that there needs to be more freedom in some ways for PG&E to solve their problems and do what they need to do, more like a normal business. There needs to be a little more oversight in other areas. For example, if you're supposed to be trimming trees, you're getting paid to trim trees, you're not trimming trees, that shouldn't slip under the wire. That should be noticed, and they should be brought to bear on that within a number of months, not years and years later. I don't believe the state should have a role in this. I do believe there should be more competition. PG&E should be in a position where they're fighting with other gas, electric, and power companies in order to provide services. And there may need to be some, how should I put, bifurcation between different areas. If you look at power, it's much more cheaply made, it's more economical in large power plants. And that works great in an urban area like this. When you get up to Paradise and Northern California and parts of Southern California, where you don't have the density of people, and the biggest problem is keeping the lines up, we may need more regional approaches toward power in those kind of areas. Where, I spent some time near Yosemite over the holidays, and how people live out there typically is they have a big propane tank. That's how they heat their house. They have power. They probably have water coming from the ground, and they have a leach field for sewage. So power is what is the one service they get. But the power lines are running through forests and all kinds of woods, and it's hard to even imagine how they deal with this when there's a fire hazard.
Do you support state mandates to push along this conversion from natural gas to electricity in terms of home use of
Yeah, I don't know if you guys caught it. There was a large environmental forum that CCL put on last week. In general, I again start with basics. The things which produce the most CO2 and are the dirtiest, produce the most pollution. Coal needs to be moved aside and supplanted with CO2, with natural gas, excuse me. Petroleum should be supplanted with natural gas. We need cleaner solutions. As a licensed mechanical engineer, I understand power really well. And, there's something called I should put this. I want to keep this in simple terms, but heat exchangers and that technology have come a long way. We can extract energy from the ground, from swimming pools, from the air much better now. With the use of actually CO2 as a working fluid, the coefficient of performance can be brought up to 5 or 7. With ammonia, which isn't appropriate for residential use, but could be for industrial use, where people are used to hazardous chemicals, you can get a coefficient of performance of 10. What that means is, with 1,000 watts, which won't even run a space heater, you can produce 10,000 watts of heat. And I think that's a great thing, yes.
So bringing this back down to where the rest of us can understand it. The direction that many cities are going, as you know, is to look towards future construction prohibiting natural gas furnaces, natural gas water heaters, etc. Is that something that you see as a state mandate in the future? Would you support that?
I think it's a good idea. I would only support it, again, if there was a plan. Regulations that just come in out of the blue without the planning in place don't make sense. It's the kind of thing that if you want to do it, you set probably a 5 or 10 year phase in, and you make sure that the industries are in place to provide the necessary alternatives. If you try to find a heat pump, a CO2-based heat pump, there are only a couple companies that make them. It's great new technology, but good luck. It would have been like asking people to put in solar power 40 years ago. would have been very difficult to get that much solar power and very expensive.
So you think the cities such as Palo Alto that have adopted ordinance that say new home construction must have electric ranges, heaters, water heaters is premature?
I think it's, here's the thing, if the whole state did it, it would be you couldn't do it. There aren't enough companies to produce heat exchangers. The capacity, the industrial capacity isn't in place. Like I said, it would be like asking for solar 40 years ago. There wasn't enough solar capacity. So,
but there's enough electric ranges and electric water heaters out there. I mean, those are abundance.
Well, yeah, ranges are easy, but the thing, when you get rid of your natural gas furnace and go to a heat exchanger, if all of a sudden there was the need for 10 million heat exchangers in California, I'm not sure where they come from. So regulation that moves in a good direction still has to have a plan. I think it's great for the furnaces, for pool pumps or pool heaters. Excuse me, it's great. I don't think it has a big impact for ranges. Ranges don't use that much gas. Your heater for your house does.
We're going to try to do a lightning round.
Yeah, I think we need to move into a short question, short answer, back and forth.
Okay.
Okay. So healthcare coverage, the governor's proposed extending Medicare to undocumented aging residents. Support or not support that?
I don't support. Well, I don't support Medicare for undocumented people.
Okay.
No, I do support something called. There was a book called The Cure That Works, which is reducing medical costs by at least 50%.
Okay.
Cannabis laws in this state, of course, have changed a great deal, and there's a lot of confusion and a lot of counties and cities that have not provided the opportunities that voters thought they were getting when they passed that proposition. One of the solutions is to reduce the tax on legal sales of marijuana products. Do you support that as an effort to reduce the temptation to go to the black market to purchase?
Yeah, the tax revenue that's come out of it is only 20 to 25% of what's been predicted because we're basically supporting organized crime. And black market. That's not a good thing. So we do need to, we need a two-step. One, enforce it. When people are selling illegally, it's no different than selling cigarettes or alcohol without paying the taxes. The IRS does a pretty good job and other agencies of enforcing that. That needs to be stepped up big time. Two, we do need to reduce the taxes to help. It's a carrot and the stick. Yeah, reduce the taxes and enforce.
The Prop 13 reform called split roll, are you in favor of that?
No.
And why is that?
Well, it just drives up cost of doing business in California. California already has the reputation of being one of the least friendly states in the country to business. I'd agree with that. And I think that further taxation on businesses is egregious in an already high tax, low service state.
Speaking of Prop 13, this March there's another Prop 13 on the ballot, which is a $15 billion school facilities bond. Are you supporting that measure?
I'm still thinking about that one. Our schools are decrepit, but the management of monies to the schools is also not responsible. The unions have basically taken all the money meant for students and buildings and made sure it goes to their pension plan. So I'm not sure, to the extent that it enables that, I don't like it, but I do want to see our schools supported.
The vaping tax has been proposed. Do you favor that in order to get some funding to prevent youth from using e-cigarettes, etc.?
Children shouldn't be smoking. People shouldn't be smoking. I've never smoked a cigarette in my life. I think you have to be an idiot to smoke. I hope I haven't offended anybody. But, it's a health disaster. So we need to make sure that children aren't vaping.
Okay. Is it worth mounting a tax for that purpose?
I don't really mind what we would call sin taxes. The cost to society for smoking is so great that anything you can do to discourage it and partially, and only partially, pay for the damage that it causes is fine.
Do you support a carbon tax in California?
I support what the CCL has, which is essentially a fee and dividend. So it's, given the amount of energy you're using, there is a fee, but that fee would go back to the citizens, not to the state. I don't believe in growing the government. I don't believe the government should profit from this. I think that all of the things we're doing will raise the cost of power. And for the poor, I don't want to say poor, but the bottom half economically, we need to make sure that that's somehow dealt with. So this dividend program should be set up so that the lower 50 or 60% of society's energy costs are essentially offset by the dividend return to them. So but not the current system. I don't approve, no.
And what do you think of the state getting into the generic drug making business?
I don't think the state should be in the business of manufacturing. It's not what the government's about. There's a book called The Cure That Works. Singapore has this plan where essentially everything is open for competition in medicine and everything is priced before you go in. Imagine Travelocity for drugs or medicine. I want drugs. I need this medicine my doctor just gave me. I'm going to get online and find the best price locally. That's how you drive down. And then you also give everybody a health savings plan, 5K, and they manage it accordingly. People are capable. They have houses and jobs and lives and checking accounts. They're not stupid. And if you say, here's your $5,000 and it rolls over to next year, they're going to spend as little as possible and keep it. You can go to a name brand hospital emergency room for $1,200, or you can take your kid to the local clinic for $150. The choice is obvious. But right now, if you imagine how you shop, who goes into a store and says, I don't really care what this car or this suit costs, just give it to me, I want it. But that's how we do medicine, as if we're all billionaires. We're not, So you should know going in exactly what it's going to cost. I don't want to pay $1,800 to have you give me a flu treatment. It's ridiculous. I want to pay $150, And I can go 30 times this year to the doctors, and I still haven't spent my $5,000 health savings plan. And then you just have insurance on top of that. So, Singapore's cut their medical costs by 50%. Sean Flynn wrote a book. He's an econ PhD from Berkeley, and he teaches at the University in Southern California called The Cure That Works. So essentially, that's the kind of approach I would adopt, not the state pretending they're investors, venture capitalists, manufacturers, or anything like that.
Governor Newsom has proposed a much scaled back version of Jerry Brown's Delta water plan, which would only have a single bore tunnel instead of Brown's more elaborate 2-tunnel system. Would you support that if you were elected?
Probably not. I think our entire water plan is broken and needs to be fixed. Our water plan in California is not working. We feed fruits and vegetables to half the country in California, to the extent that we're not able to give water to farmers and that we are on permanent water rationing. There's something horribly broken. So I would kind of go back to basics on the water plan and figure out what really needs to be done. There's just so many problems right now with water planning in California that it could be one of the big problems for the state in 10 years.
Well, how would you propose that we get water from where it is to where it needs to be, if not a plan such as the one that Newsom is proposing?
Endemic in that question is the assumption that it needs to be there. There are a lot of things we can do. First, you always start with conservation. Farmers need to think about, like in Israel, drip irrigation. It cuts water usage by 90%. People in Los Angeles need to understand they can't hose down their sidewalks. There's just where water goes. We need more water storage too. Part of this comes about because we don't have dams. There was $7.5 billion set aside in 2014 for water storage. It wasn't built. We haven't built a dam in 40 years in an entire generation. We are a water failure as a generation. So along with dams comes hydroelectric power. Great thing, clean energy, renewable. So there needs to be more water storage where the water is instead of just kind of going after water in another place. It's 11% of the energy usage in the state to pump water. Shouldn't be pumping water halfway across the state. We need to be storing it closer to where it's needed.
Okay, thank you. We've run out of time. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Good luck.